Welcome once again to our study of magic dance, the display of the self-nature of the 5 wisdom dakinis. As always, kindly recognize what we're doing here as a means to penetrate a profound confusion that has us caught within a pattern of suffering. And in penetrating this particular, or not particular, but in penetrating our personal condition of confusion, this will enable us to have the experience, the insight, and the ability to reach out to others and be there for others. And this, of course, is what we see in the living tradition that we are apprenticing with here. We are presently apprentices with Thinley Norbu Rinpoche. We are students, and even though the conspicuous outer display of Thinley Norbu Rinpoche is not visibly manifest, then his speech is very much with us. And combining our own practice, our own understanding with the presence, the compassionate presence of Rinpoche through his words, something could emerge, which is what we then can refer to as magic, and which we sometimes refer to as blessing, and really which enables us to connect with what is the objective of the path, and which here is referred to as our, say, secret essence. Essence in the sense of it's something that is truly there in terms of the ground of our being. So of course, when we are confused about reality, because we don't really understand what there is. And what's implicit in the Buddha Dharma is showing us what there is beyond our subjective confusion. And so continually the project within the Buddhist path is to work with our personal confusion and eliminate that. In the text that we're studying here, there's a lot of emphasis on understanding, on one hand, the nature of things, the objective reality, and also understanding the subject that engages this reality. And this subject is, when it's confused, mistaken, not properly understanding this reality. And when it's not confused, it begins to see this reality in a far more expansive, far more real way. And this is where we then refer to it in terms of seeing its pure nature, seeing it in terms of it being a dance, seeing it in terms of the 5 elements and the 5 mothers, the 5 consorts. And so the injunction really with this text is to give us an overview that enables us then to apply this insight in the practice of meditation. There's been some really good questions, and I'd like to, I hope there'll be time. I'd like to take out some time to answer these questions. One really important comment was actually last time I misread, where in the introductory poem, Rinpoche speaks about the 5 dakinis, and he says, if we do not compliment you, you become 5 witches. If we do compliment you, you become 5 angels. And I mistook this to be the compliment as an expressing appreciation, which of course, yes, that applies possibly. But of course, what we're talking about here is compliment you really in terms of meeting you and engaging fully. And this is where, again, we in the Vajrayana particularly speak about the meeting of non-duality, the meeting in terms of the perceiver and perceived, the notions of duality falling away. And that is where where we are then complementary in the sense of there not being this division. So that, and also then there were some questions about how this should be practiced. And everything that we are studying here complements our practice. So this really is, you could say it's an introduction to the view. We could also say it's an introduction to what we can call ground tantra, which is an introduction to the abiding nature that is then the foundation for the perspective as we practice, particularly then in the Vajrayana context. But we're covering a lot of ground also in terms of the general teachings, in terms of the two truths and the way in which we perceive and misperceive our reality. Okay, well, look, I'll take some time at the end here. So just any questions that you might have, just write them in and we'll get to them. Okay. So we'll look at the chapter called Personal and General Phenomena. And this is where we then engage with this perspective that we in Western philosophy call epistemology, which is not the theory of knowledge. How do we actually know what we know? Is our knowledge valid? And that's where we need to take into account then these two perspectives. One is how we see things, and then again how others see things, and our shared perception. So that's where there is within what we call relative truth, which is then the truth that applies as far as each and every one of us have a particular perspective. Everything that we see from our particular perspective is of course true. This is my, what can we call it? My home. I'm in my home, and that's a very personal phenomenon. Other people would refer to other things as my home. At the same time, there's also general phenomena. I could say this is a room, and we all share that perception. And so there are these personal experiences that are true. There's the general experiences that are true. But from the point of view of absolute truth, these are all dualistic perceptions. So they're all ultimately invalid in the sense that we are misperceiving reality. And of course, that's what defines sentient beings. But within the experience of being as sentient beings, then there is certainly a dimension that we need to account for, and which is completely true for us. It's very important that we can distinguish between personal and general phenomena. And it's an important point that we're all very well aware of. And that is, of course, what it is that defines what we are personally experiencing and what it is that we share in terms of experience. Otherwise, we can't talk together. So that's where we can't connect subject and object unless we're aware of that. But that is what drives a lot of our suffering when we fail, actually, to acknowledge that others' view, whether it's what we can call deceptive or non-deceptive, inverted, or actual real relative truth, whether that applies. But certainly it's essential for us to be aware of how this relative perspective plays out. So in terms of just defining the personal and general phenomena, Thinley Norbu Rinpoche writes, an example of personal phenomena is the dream phenomena that arise at night from daytime habits. In a dream, we might see a house. Because this is visible only to us, it is our personal phenomena. Then we might actually build the house, which becomes visible to all who see it. This is then general phenomena. So this is continually something that we are sharing. We're building experience. We're building a community of shared perceptions on the basis of this interplay between individuals and communities or shared perceptions. So you might have this personal phenomena, like we talked before, the dream house, then the dream house becomes a reality, and that then is shared, and that then becomes someone else sees that house, and they might not build exactly the same house, but that inspiration becomes their personal phenomena in terms of then they creating something that's a shared perception. And Rinpoche gives then the example of a fashion concept that takes place in a designer's head, then it becomes something that others see. This in terms inspires others. And then again, then we might emerge with a new common fashion. So in this way, the shared conventions, they become truth. Again, this is still relative, and where you have, in some cultures, you refer to sugar, then you just think about sugar. Some cultures, you talk about bread, some people just think about white bread. If you talk about bread around here, it can be a large variety of all sorts of different bread, gluten-free and sourdough and so on and so forth. So these conceptual veils, rather these conceptual labels, they veil the empty nature, because of course all of these, they're just place markers for something that in fact has no intrinsic identity as such. The bread doesn't think I am a sourdough bread, or I am a gluten-free bread, or whatever it might be. These are all labels that we give them, and they're completely valid. So we're not saying anything about there's nothing there. But what we are saying is that these are labels that apply from the point of view, from the vantage point of ours, and also some shared labels. But from the phenomena itself, there is no such a actual identity. This is a very important point. And that's where also we understand how Dharma is the nature of phenomena. And as such, we don't need to change phenomena, but what we are doing, we're misconstruing reality. And that's where we're not in touch. For us to be in touch is then the study of Dharma. Dharma is to align ourselves with reality. We might call it Buddhism. We might call it all sorts of things, but what the Buddha taught was essentially for us to align ourselves with reality. And reality is unchanging. What we, however, have presently are these labels. And that's where we attach value to these labels, and they obscure phenomena. They're practical, but we fail to see the nature of reality. So for example, when we see something that we might be very attached to and it then breaks, or we lose it, or whatever might happen, that's contrary to our wishes and our attachment, we suffer. And so there is continually our inability to go beyond the surface of things. So that is why Rinpoche uses this word, which is obstructing. Phenomena, they are, you could say, a web of causes and conditions, but the way that we label them, obstruct them, we freeze them in a particular way. So that's where we talk about then phenomena being solid and obstructing. It's all very valid and it's all good for us, but it is the place where we fail to get the larger picture. And of course, also this applies when we have specialists that, we look at a given object, and we look at a rock, and then a geologist will tell us, this is this kind of rock, and somebody who maybe specializes in these particular rocks will tell us an even more detailed story. And so there's a reality beyond just what meets the eye. So these general phenomena, of course, they're understood through conventions. We talk about rocks, we talk about bread, we talk about sugar. If we understand general phenomena's relative nature, we understand others' general and personal phenomena. So this is also where somebody else might speak about something in terms of their house or their particular way of seeing things. This is also really important when we talk politics. This is where we very often fail, because we become very righteous and attached to our particular viewpoint. And we insist that others possibly should subscribe to our viewpoint. And conversation is very good, because that is where we can begin to develop we can understand what the other is saying if we're listening, and the others will hear what we're saying if they're listening. So that's where the more we understand this nature of the relativity, the relative nature of what we share as phenomena, the more we're actually able to accurately appreciate the variety of phenomena. So we talk about truth. So as we can imagine, one person's truth is another person's untruth. So somebody listens to a piece of music, beautiful piece by, let's say, Stravinsky, and for somebody else, and we would say this is truly beautiful, and for somebody else, that is maybe truly awful. And so that's where our perceptions of the phenomena are obstructed. So that's where we solidify our perceptions. And this is because we fixate on them. We get attached to it. This particular piece of music is so sublime. And it is a piece of music that gives us great joy, undoubtedly, but then we solidify it further through our attachment and various ways that we label it. So, as we know, what is beautiful to some is then not beautiful to others. So we talk about actual relative truth and inverted relative truth. And this is also something you come across, of course, in Western philosophy. You know, you have the a stick, which is just, you know, is validly perceived as straight. You put it in in clear water, and you see it bend. And that's where you're seeing something that is definitely a perception, that's a valid perception, it's relative, valid, but it's nevertheless distorted. So there's a distortion taking place, what we sometimes say deceptive relative truth, mistaken relative truth. Rinpoche refers to it as inverted relative truth. So we have actual relative truth and inverted relative truth. Again, from the point of view of awakening, from the point of view of not having the duality of perceiver and perceived, and all the kleshas and karmic projections that come to that, then everything we call relative truth, from that perspective, is deceptive. But us who live within a dualistic experience, then we have these differences. So actual relative truth is what can be sensed and which functions. It's like a built house. So you build a house also, there are particular rules. You know, you have particular ways that apply to everybody who's within the trade of building houses. There's very real functional reality. And of course, also that's what science does. Our science is extraordinary because it has such an incredible grasp of understanding how things function. Inverted relative truth can be a hallucination. So that's where we're seeing something that's for us is true, but it's actually not true in terms of just the shared experience. And it's not true in terms of actually having any function. So we think it's real, but it's not. It doesn't actually work. The hallucination we're having doesn't actually have any reality. So again, for sublime beings, both actual and inverted relative truth is inverted relative truth. For sentient beings, for Buddhas looking at sentient beings, they would say that we're hallucinating. We're hallucinating a sense of person, our experience, our body, our identity, our world, and so on. Just like in a dream. So we can say there's a dream, which is our personal experience, but it's actually not true. All the experiences in the dream, within the dream, they're true, but they're actually not truly happening. Just like hallucinations. So personal and general phenomena each have actual and inverted relative truth. So Rinpoche gives this example of a magician's, right? So there's a magician who knows that what he's conjuring up is not actually there. But for the audience, it seems to be actually really there. So that's where the entire audience is then deceived by a trick. Then you have somebody for whom there's a real truth. You know, like he gives the example of the dictator Hitler, who then had a particular invalid truth, but for him it was actually true. But of course, for everybody else, it was clear to see that it was complete insanity. So again, that's where we can see that general phenomena's inverted relative truth is then actual truth for someone. So this is important for us again to understand really what is taking place. And this is very helpful in terms of us understanding what we call relative and absolute truth. These insights, they inform our journey. They inform our dismantling of confusion. So the more we can be clear on these things, we're not so easily thrown when we have somebody who's clearly mad, or just say, well, they're having a moment of inverted relative truth. We don't necessarily have to pathologize it or be opposed to it or whatever, but we simply are just clear on what actually is taking place. So this also, of course, plays out then in terms of the practice of the path. And so for Hinayana practitioners, then there is the Hinayana in the sense of those who abide by the monastic view, the monastic practice, and in general the approach of the individual liberation. Also, you could have persons who abide by the Vinaya rules who are lay persons, but that's where they often, and you very often see this in the way that you have these sort of stereotypified versions of what Buddhist practice is supposed to be like. Then you know, everybody is supposed to be monastics, but that's where there is the insight that yes, the belief in pleasures as good is inverted relative truth. This is why ordinary beings, they suffer. They take what is in fact belongs to the truth of suffering. They take that as bliss. What is in fact impermanent, they take as being permanent. What has no self, they take to being a self. And so in this way, there's the inverted relative truth that is then understood to be deceptive. And then, for example, attachment to pleasures is seen as being something that is deceptive. So for such practitioners, aversion to pleasures is essential to enlightenment. That is their actual relative truth. To be completely disenchanted. And this is not just for Hinayana practitioners as such. You also would hear Milarepa talk about, and the general sort of approach of the path is very much based on what we call revulsion. Simply just seeing this is deceptive, this pattern is destructive. For Mahayana practitioners, then a larger view applies. And that's where then the view at pleasures being something that should be avoided, that it's essential to have aversion. That's again an inverted relative truth in the sense that that is misunderstand. That's not truly seeing the nature of reality. So for Bodhisattva, then pleasures and pain, they are seen as equally illusory. And this realization is essential for enlightenment. This is where the Mahayana practitioners is free from any particular attachment to any particular reference point. So this is what brings about complete enlightenment. The inner Vajrayana practitioners, both Hinayana and Mahayana's actual relative truths are inverted relative truths. Because for the Vajrayana yogi, then anything that manifests never departs from the realm of purity. And as such, any display that arises doesn't need the antidote of being rejected, doesn't need the antidote of seeing it as being empty. There's no need for any conceptual antidote. And as such, there's never any straying from the absolute nature of the Dharmata. Everything that arises is seen as pure wisdom display. And that's where for the Vajrayanas, then the relative truth arises as pure in terms of what we call pure perception. The relative truth is seen as pure as we have it in the sadhana practice, where we would see relative truth in terms of deity, mandala, and so on. And this understanding of purity is then further deepened through the practices of the second, third, and fourth empowerments. So what we have in the, and we'll be looking more at nihilists. Nihilists. I think, what is it, nihilists? Anyway, so there you have the view that everything in this universe, and this is a very disempowered position, that everything is just random. You know, the sort of a chaos, random chaos thing we're just thrown into our particular experience. So that's where there's, of course, there's natural sciences have some understanding of how things are related in terms of cause and effect, but there's not really any sense of everything is really seen as just coming together without any greater plan. And of course, intrinsic to the nihilist view, in particular materialist science, is the dismissing of things like intelligent design and so on. So that's where, according to the Buddhist view, and Buddhist view, they, by the way, they don't subscribe to intelligent design either, but there is the clear understanding that everything is based on causes, which are like seeds, and these seeds, they are then what we call root circumstances. Now they gravitate, or they work together with contributing circumstances, what we sometimes also call cause and conditions. So you have a seed, and that of course is, you could say, it has its particular, you could say, destiny, if you like, is to become a particular plant, rice plant or apple tree or whatever. But how it grows is not at all certain. So there's never ever any sense of, you could say, deterministic view. There's an understanding of a fundamental root cause, but how things develop is very much based on then the contributing circumstances. So of course, what a particular root cause or circumstance has is then that it gravitates towards particular circumstances. In terms of our personal experience, if we have good karma, then that tends to draw in perceptions from the outside that reflect this condition. So that's where there's a perpetuation. If there's a bad karma, then also the environment aggravates this particular condition. So this is something that applies when we have various styles of rebirth, whether we're talking about rebirth from the point of view of the cause, which are the psychological experiences that we might have in terms of aggression or in terms of self-absorption or whatever it might be, or the result in terms of the actual experience of rebirth in a particular realm, such as hell realms or God realms or whatever it might be. So that's where karma then has this capacity to engage circumstances that, of course, have to do with the projections that come from what we then call karmic projection. So this also then has to do with, we have a particular experience, and then when we are in a particular, again, talking about causal karma, if we have, for example, a sense of trust and balance, then we'll also meet people. Strangely enough, we seem to meet people who are, share that joy, or we feel at ease. And when we're sort of thrown a bit and imbalanced or whatever, then very often the circumstances, they seem to be aggravating. So there's also that in terms of rebirth and so on, where we might be born in a particular place with a shared perception. So what we then call group phenomena. So personal phenomena and karma attract corresponding general group phenomena. So we pursue these objectives with gross elemental means, without awareness of the mind's power, and that attracts bad group phenomena. Now this here, and Rinpoche is talking about, you could say, political situations or societal situations where, when there's no real sense of what lies beyond just the gross, the material and so on, then objectives are pursued solely in terms of just the outer appearance, without any understanding of the deeper causes behind. And that's where you can see there's a big difference between societies that are ruled with an awareness of something that lies beyond the material, or those that just strive towards the material. But that's where those that just strive towards the material generally come with this nihilistic ignorance about the subtle aspects that drive greater happiness, such as, for example, ethical practice, where you have the gross sort of objective of, enrichment or acquisition without any ethical spirit behind it, then this drives ultimately suffering. Whereas somebody like Gandhi then understood how, without necessarily having great acquisition, then nobility was such an important issue. So of course, people who are very material, they would sort of look at Gandhi and say, this is rather annoying that we're being led by somebody who's sort of, they would perceive as idealistic. Where's progress going to come from? Whereas from Gandhi's point of view, and what of course Rinpoche here is speaking about, is that for there really to be happiness flourishing, that it doesn't help if there's fixation on the gross elements. So that's where this kind of personal intention perpetuates this positive phenomena. So generally, regardless of whether our phenomena are good or bad, we are still merely circling in samsara. And that's an important point. As long as we still have duality, we might have happiness, but we still, like Paltra Rinpoche, he will say, it's really just the difference between the happinesses of samsara and the suffering of samsara. It's really just the difference between whether an insect caught inside a jar, it's in the upper part of the jar or in the lower part of the jar. So again, referring to the political societal situation, ordinary leaders without wisdom will always be creating changing or painful circumstances for themselves or others. Again, essentially sort of a limited perspective that doesn't appreciate this deeper dimension of what we perhaps could call wholesomeness, but of course what Rinpoche is talking about then, the inconspicuous subtle elements. So that's where that kind of ignorance really creates difficulties. Whereas sublime leaders, and that's again where we're looking at a place where church and state unite, interestingly. That again, we sort of need to look into pre-modernity really to find societies like that. And this is also where we can understand the logic behind an institution like the Dalai Lama, right? And also why spiritual sages would be asked advice when it came to handling secular circumstances, because for the sage there's no difference between the secular or the dharmic, if you like, and as such then it's more about understanding the nature of reality beyond just the surface, understanding the subtle elements behind. So that's where sublime leaders, Rinpoche says, can change, or he doesn't say that, but the point he's making, is that sublime leaders can change and benefit general phenomena. So that's where we have great leaders and never be harming by the shifting circumstances of general phenomena. Wise leaders are not thrown by or panicked by the predictable changes that take place. So without wisdom, our subtle elements are dependent on unreliable gross elements and our energy is lost. So that's where the ordinary person is exhausted by pursuing what in fact is just unreliable changing circumstances. However, contrary then, and this is implicit then in the practice of the path, with wisdom we can create new contributing circumstances. Since wisdom is unconditional, we're drawing on the unconditional primordial ground. I remember once Sonsekens Rinpoche defining merit as really being that which reflects Buddha nature. So merit is not only acting in a particular virtuous way, but it's acting in a way that's in alignment with the unconditional primordial ground, which is free from the toxicity of duality. So that's where, when we have insight into this dimension, then that's what we're effectively practicing. If we practice with ethics, if we practice with compassion, if we practice with pure perception, then we align ourselves with this unconditional foundational ground of wisdom. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, wisdom mind's secret root circumstances need no contributing circumstances in order to manifest, since they are the pure secret essence. When recognized, They will not diminish or become dormant, even when contributing circumstances change, because they never depend on gross or subtle circumstances. That is why they are called secret. So when there's no duality, and when the circumstances that that we normally fail to recognize as being inseparable from the, you could say, secret root circumstance, when we engage in that in a dualistic way, then we become exhausted. When we abide by the pure secret essence, and when it is, this nature is recognized, then the natural qualities that come out from the root circumstances, they naturally, they're not the circumstances that arise from within this non-duality. They don't necessarily constitute change. So there's not any kind of coming and going. So this condition in which we fail to understand that is where we then refer to the condition of the root circumstances as being secret. So this is the condition of a sentient being failing to see the, you could say, the ground, the cause or the root circumstance, and it's through recognizing this nature then that someone who sees this is never in any way thrown by the changing conditions that that might take place. So the world in general, and this is something that's basic to the entire Buddhist understanding of reality, it exists in terms of what we call dependently arisen phenomena, that it's always shifting. It's something that we verify. It's something that we take for granted, but it does spell out that there's no enduring essence. Everything is a fluid, changing web of causes and conditions. Of course, here Rinpoche refers to that insight, the mind that's privy to that, as this secret essence. And in Vajrayana particularly, we refer to secret essence in terms of this wisdom that's not deceived by appearances. But intrinsic to that is not being deceived by appearances. And that's where the Buddha teaches everything exists in terms of web of causes and conditions. So that's where the sutra perspective takes that into account and works with creating the causes for eliminating confusion and creating the causes for realizing the unconfused ground nature. So that's where the cause and the result are apart. There's a gradual path. The mantra perspective is that even though temporarily there is some obscuring condition that makes that veils the nature of reality, even though there are these temporary conditions, the nature itself abides untainted by confusion. And so mantra from the very outset takes this, what we can call the result, as the path. And that's where then the mantra path operates with this cause and result as inseparable. And that's where the what we call the ground tantra, or the cause or the foundations of the Vajrayana, which is our Buddha nature, this possesses already the result. We would say it's like if we have a mold where the statue inside is complete. So the cause is something that already possesses the result. So we, of course, what we do is we eliminate what veils what veils this abiding nature. And so there is, of course, you could say, a process. There's a path, but it really is a path in which the cause and the result are not two different things. And all along, it does apply that, of course, within the cause, the result is, you could say, potentially present. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a connection between the apple seed and the apple tree, and the rose seed and the rose flower. So with the path, what we then do is we provide conditions that correspond to the result. So in one way, you could say, from the sutra point of view, we're building up something, but from the Vajrayana point of view, we're really just aligning ourselves. So that's where we talk about yoga, in the sense that we are aligning ourselves with an already existing predisposition. So this is where this fuses inseparably with the result. This is where we arrive at a place that is essentially based on the original cause, or we align ourselves with this cause and reveal what was always there. So within relative reality, we communicate from one to another. Sublime beings also do that with their example in their lives. So we, of course, we generally operate within learning. We learn things, we grow up, we assimilate and acquire knowledge. Sublime beings, they show us something which lies beyond data, beyond just intellectual knowledge. They are, again, showing us something that connects with the subtle elements. So that's where they teach through their example. So that's where we look to the teacher. And of course, there's a lot to be learned in terms of, you could say, the basics of the path, and initially through hearing and reflecting, the basic study of the path. But then the actual blessing of the teacher goes beyond the ordinary acquisition of data, and is something about being sensitive to, engaging again, what Rinpoche refers to as the subtle wisdom elements. So that's where sublime teachers present reality through their example in their life. So that's where you, for example, have Rinpoche gives the mention of Jesus who walks on the water, and also you have stories of what is in Milarepa's songs, the meeting at the Silver Spring. What's again? Oh, what's his name? Shengom Repa or something. Anyway, that's where Milarepa also walks across a river, without his feet even getting wet. And so that's where the other party sort of goes, there's something beyond what we had thought was possible. And this generates faith, and this generates an appreciation for that which is greater than just the sort of gross ordinary reality. So that's where, of course, the scope of a materialist science fails to understand anything beyond just the gross material. And as much as we can say that is reliable science, then the other is equally reliable, but it operates within a different parameter and a different definition of science that takes into account the subtle, and that which is actually what we live, namely through our own subjective conscious experience, which has moments of being great and open and free, and moments of retracting into painful pettiness. So that is not the scope of an ordinary materialist science, but it is very much the scope of the immediate experience that we operate with all the time. So understanding the causalities and understanding the dynamics and the phenomenology of that particular dimension of which really rules our experience is a greater science. And that's where, when we talk about such a display of miracles, this is really just being able to, this is an expression of properly connecting with this dimension, which Rinpoche then refers to as our secret lineage. So Rinpoche says, if we first recognize and establish confidence in our own personal phenomena's pure secret essence and light energy, we can love and have faith in ourselves, because we understand clearly that the never fading, never diminishing source of all pure qualities is our wisdom mind. Then we are automatically self-conquered by the pure self-seduction of the 5 wisdom dakinis, who rule the universal 5 elements and are the consorts of the 5 wisdom Buddhas. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Again, this all comes back to essentially what we're doing through the whole Buddhist path. This is particular language, and this is particular Vajrayana language. But at the same time, we're really just saying, if we're talking general language of the Buddhist teaching, we're talking, this is the experience of vipassana. This is where the ordinary uptightness of the dualistic mind is freed into the bliss that no longer is contaminated by the struggle of self and other. Rinpoche says, only with a wisdom point of view can we transform our personal impure gross element self-phenomena into pure self-secret wisdom phenomena. Again, to do this, transforming the dualistic, gross, heavy perceptions into seeing phenomena for what they truly are in terms of their lightness when there's not the dualistic projection. For that to take place, we need this wisdom. And this wisdom is where we dismantle our ordinary confusion. And that is then where we need to understand the reality of this emptiness nature, or the nature of wisdom, and then to pursue it, familiarize ourselves with this through the practice of meditation. And Rinpoche says, since all general phenomena come from personal phenomena, when personal phenomena become pure, impure general phenomena also become pure. Through this transformation, we can spontaneously help beings without rejecting general phenomena and without accepting personal phenomena, becoming one with the pure secret essence of all phenomena. So again, this is where we talk about how our delusion, when this delusion is purified through our experience of inner purity, then also we see the purity presence in our phenomenal world, the purity that's present in the outer world, and the purity that's present within other individuals. And that's where naturally the boundary between self and other is dissolves, and that's also where there's spontaneously then there is the ability to help others and bringing out this quality, connecting with this quality in others. So this comes from, again, the pure secret essence of all phenomena. And we can call this so many things. We can call it the mother, Prajna Paramita, Dakini, the feminine principle, the Dharmadhatu, emptiness, wisdom, co-emergent wisdom, and so on. In fact, what is the objective of the entire path? So this nature of Dharma that we are approaching, very often what we do is limit it. When there's the ordinary limited mind, it tries to pigeonhole reality, and that's what we call extremes. So the path is to go beyond extremes. So Rinpoche says, suffering in hopelessness, suffering in hopefulness is the eternalist. Suffering in hopelessness is the nihilist. Beyond both hopefulness and hopelessness is the Buddhist. Now, just because we might have become card-carrying Buddhists, it's not that we can just sort of get a t-shirt saying, I'm beyond hopefulness and hopelessness. This is what we're talking about here is the view. So just like you might have the occasional eternalist, which gets overcome by hopelessness, then the implication of eternalism is that there is some great, graceful absolute. And the nihilist occasionally will be overcome by hopefulness, but implicit in the nihilist view is again this very disempowering perspective that there is nothing beyond just the immediate, here you are, you know, and then you're dead. And so what is implicit in these two is that they essentially operate as cerebral, conceptual constructs that are basically they are out of touch with reality. They operate with presumptions, assumptions that there is some higher power, or some assumptions that there's nothing more than just the material, the physical. And both of these, they operate with these from a point of view of not actually connecting and seeing properly. And what we're aspiring to on the Buddhist path is to see properly. And that doesn't necessarily lead to anything about hoping for something or fearing something. It's simply just becoming awake to what is. So because of our habits, then we don't recognize the pure secret wisdom potential of the five senses, which is inseparable from the pure secret wisdom potential of the five elements. So we continually engage in perceptions. Now, these perceptions, they continually generate an experience that when we grasp in terms of duality, there is the object and there's the perceiving subject. But this grasping, when free of that, then it has a natural potential for that which is essentially free from any confusion. We're confused on the basis of our duality. What is the proposal here is that there is a potential that we fail to experience. So what we then do in our confusion is that we hold on to our particular senses, and they then need to be gratified. We want them gratified by some external objects. And what we end up having is an alienated experience in which that which actually doesn't have any foundation for division is actually divided and objectified. So that's where we simply just fail to see the nature of reality. So again, this really comes down to the way in which we ignorantly relate to our phenomena. So Rinpoche here is talking about how, in general, habits obscure vision, wisdom, potential of the five senses and the five elements. That's the point. So that's where we fail to appreciate the five senses and the five elements. Again, this is where, when we begin to work within the Vajrayana, there's very much a sense of engaging with the senses, but not from the point of view of gratifying the senses in a dualistic sense, but from the point of view of, from the perspective of deity. Then the spark of perception can be integrated in a non-dual way, in which then this creates then a connection with pure wisdom potential. Now, this potential that lies beyond appearances, the eternalists, they accept subtle substance beyond the gross phenomena. They would say there is something more to everything. It's all the creation of the creator. Nihilists, they would say, forget about there being some creator. Prove us the creator. We just believe what is tangible, verifiable, empirical. So that's where you could say, exaggerate or misconstrue from their own particular vantage point. But they also, and this is Rinpoche's point also, they're also onto something. That's what we also don't want to forget. So the eternalists, they believe in a subtle, eternal principle as the source of everything. So that's where, whether we're talking about the sort of an Abrahamic version of the creator of everything, or we're talking about more mystical sense of some absolute substance, there is something that is eternal. So we refer to that as eternalism. There is something. Nihilists, they believe that there are only gross elements. Some say they arise from nothing, they just happen. Some say that they are within this finite cycle of matter and energy. What's it called? The principle of mass conservation, I think. So anyway, The nihilists, they will only say what they can assert, and they ignore that there's a whole dimension of what is intangible that's continually happening. It happens when nihilists fall in love. It happens when nihilists, they catch on to a joke, and like Rinpoche was saying, the upturned lips that conceal subtle elements behind, and so forth. So nihilists believe a person consists of matter only, and the mind originates with a material aggregation and ceases with it. And that again is something that, of course, is intrinsic to the way most of us in the modern world were brought up, completely ignoring the fact that there's not really a cause and effect relationship between what is without consciousness, even though it might be subtle biological systems, and the actual subjectivity that we experience, our first person subjective experience. No connection whatsoever. And that's where there is, for the nihilist then, there is what we call this explanatory gap. So the eternalist and the nihilist each sees the other's view in conflict with reality and a threat to proper understanding. What is it again? Yeah. Rinpoche says, to the eternalist, the nihilist's reliance only on gross substance is a threat to the understanding of the subtle substance source of all phenomena. To the nihilist, the eternalist reliance on the subtle and immaterial is a threat to material progress, which is the visible product of all substantial qualities. So to the eternalist, the nihilist doesn't see the grace of the Lord, and to the nihilist, the religious person is completely backward and ignorant, and with people like that, you can't get anywhere. So we have this again, this is where Rinpoche's humor really is beautiful, because Rinpoche is so good at juxtaposing the sort of the comedy of these two sort of, you could say, entrenched positions, very serious positions. And the comedy lies in the sort of the lack of wider perspective that's taking place within these two entrenched positions. So we call them extremes. So eternalists seek what is beyond the gross material substance and invoke it externally as deity with devotion and prayer. So this we see. Even though they don't see it like that, Rinpoche says the essence of all such devotion is always pure, the pure source of the elements. So that's the thing. Intrinsic in the eternalist practice, there is actually an appreciation that sort of is aligned with truth in some way. So Rinpoche would say deity's form cannot appear, deity's speech cannot sound, deity's mind cannot pervade in the gross elements without a pure element intention. The grace and blessing of the deity's form come predominantly from the pure earth and water elements. The grace and blessing of the deity's speech come predominantly from the pure fire and air elements. The grace and blessing of the deity's mind come predominantly from the pure space element. So that's where, from the practitioner of from the practitioners of the Vajrayana. I'm having a moment of doubt actually if Rinpoche here is referring to deity as in the Vajrayana context. But anyway, the implication is that everything that we refer to in terms of the pure form of phenomena beyond the gross material is perceived and manifests on the basis of this pure element intention, the appreciation of that which is inconspicuous. And then he talks about then how the various elements, they manifest, the aspects of body, speech, and mind manifest on the basis of the elements, or the essence of the elements. Now, when it comes to nihilism, there's also a potential for purity. And of course, we can also see in the materialist argument which is this deconstruction that goes beyond sort of the naive assumption that there is something that possesses essence. The problem with that is it then doesn't take into the account the appearance aspect that takes place. So as much as we can say, you know, things don't have an enduring essence, whatever it might be, you know, and we talk about this is very much intrinsic to the whole sort of notion of post-modernity, post-truth, and all of that, which is some valid arguments, but then fall into just saying, well, then there's nothing, and completely overlooking the fact that there's plenty. There's all sorts of, you know, there's phenomena, countless phenomena, but the failure to find an absolute essence then leads to this nihilist extreme. So Rinpoche says nihilists don't understand what is beyond the gross material substance, but they still abide by the nature of what is beyond substance. And that, of course, is true, right? So even though they don't see it like that, Rinpoche points to how their insight into cause and effect reflect acceptance of the law of karma. For example, politicians will plan ahead. You know, they'll make sort of plans, and you know, any nihilist will say, well, you know, the bus should be here at 5 p.m., so I'll be home by 5:30, right? And that is essentially operating with a sense of cause and effect. So as much as nihilists, they deconstruct everything and saying there's no essence, then they're continually operating within the experience of appearances and within the cause and effect of appearances. So a nihilist believes in something as unreal as time and the future, which reflects an acceptance of what in effect is the basis for future lives. So as long as we operate with time, and as long as there's situation within the time we have future, and as long as there's continual adherence to that which is intangible, then effectively we are continually creating and planning for tomorrow. Nihilists will have superannuation, and they save up for old age, and effectively also themselves subject to that which would lead to future lives. And then there's when we make phone calls, we're connecting with all-pervading linkless mind. So even though we don't have somebody out there right in front of us, there is still this all-pervading sense of connection. We are not connecting with an actual person. It's just on the basis of some digital or analog signals. There is this experience of connection that takes place. So we can imagine, our ordinary limited mind can imagine places and times because there are then connections, either in the past or indicatory of the future. But as long as we don't have a full understanding of emptiness and also of, you'd say, the causation, dependent arising, and so on, of course, we're still limited. We don't really fully comprehend our relative reality. So we can assert things in particular ways. We can say this is real, or there's something, or there's nothing. There's a reality, there's no reality, the extremes of eternalism and nihilism. And on the basis of that, it's essentially that which defines the condition of a sentient being, that it continually operates within this assertion that there is something, and even solidifies the absence of things. So that's where this continually keeping reference points is what we call extremes. And that is what drives the duality. That's what drives and perpetuates this sense of self and the objects. So the Buddha taught the qualities of enlightenment to liberate nihilism. He taught the empty aspect to relieve sentient beings of eternalism. So we have a lot of teachings that highlight qualities of enlightenment. So we speak about compassion. We speak about the wisdom of the Buddha, the strength of the Buddha, and so on. And we celebrate. We look at a teacher and say, this teacher has a great kindness. This teacher is brilliant in so many ways. And that's where this frees us from the sense of that there's nothing there. If we're brought up on materialist science and existentialism, then I'm sort of rather sort of uncomfortable with the bleakness and the nothingness of that perspective, then encountering enlightened persons, we very much see the flourishing of these qualities. And then again, for those who hold on to phenomena naively as having intrinsic value, there's the good against the bad. We are good, they're bad. That's where it's important to show the relativity and emptiness of these labels. And that's where the empty aspect is really to relieve sentient beings of these sort of absolute references or absolute labels. So the Buddha's own reality and intrinsic in what the Buddha's path is about is to go beyond these conceptual extremes. So that's where, as Rinpoche started off saying, you know, the beyond the hopelessness and hopefulness is the Buddhist. So we presently experience only as much as we can actually understand. So this is the condition of ordinary sentient beings. So this view that we operate with is essentially what shapes our experience. So this is again where we come back to the science of the Dharma is very much premised on this perspective that we have. Our individual is able to understand reality or not understand reality. And maybe we can understand a little bit more of reality. And that's where our view then essentially shapes the way that if we're seeing reality in a wide way or just seeing partially. So the thing is, our mind has nothing substantial about it. There's nothing there, and yet it's within the mind that everything arises. So again, this is something that we needn't just say, okay, the Buddha said that, but we can look. There's nothing about the mind that is substantial, and yet everything that we experience is experienced through this mind. This could sound far out and interesting and mystical, but it stands in sharp opposition to the mythologies that we are continually fed through our media, through our culture, and the belief systems and the discourse that essentially shapes the outlook. And that's where we can appreciate what is being said here very much in juxtaposition to the sort of naive version of reality that is very sort of prevalent, of course, on a cultural context, but also in terms of our subjective experience. So when we begin to understand more, and that's the purpose of studying this book here, then this enables us to see more. So of course, depending on where we are, our view is different. There's famously we can describe the views in terms of the different places we are on the path, but just in general, the difference between us as being uptight individuals or being relaxed, open-minded, easygoing, kind individuals. There's very different ways in which we see things. So of course, what we intend to do in the Buddhist path is not sort of shape a new Buddhist truth, but actually go beyond any kind of conceptual labeling. Anytime there's a label, we're not really connecting with reality. So we talk about the ultimate view of the Mahayana is this freedom from conceptual constructs, nishprapancha. Sometimes we also talk freedom from elaborations and things like that. Rinpoche says, in enlightened wisdom mind, there is no subject, no object, no between subject and object, no beginning, no end, no time, and no direction. So there is no point of view. And that is the beautiful thing of what the Buddha is intending to help us with. The problem is we're so stuck in points of view, and he wants us to get unstuck. So he's not feeding us a new dogma, a new belief system of any kind, or some new truth, but he is introducing us to what is valid. And that's where there's this vast understanding that is being presented here, but it's not a truth that can be limited in terms of being objectified as subject, object, etc. Now, I like this text so much that it's going to be painful to rush through it. I have done that before, and it's not particularly doing justice to the subject matter. And so I hope that's okay with all of you. Even though I had planned, and I've sent you in that email you received, sort of a list. Oh, that's how I have done it in the past. But I feel in a way there's been some very good questions that came in, and I feel maybe we should not worry about whether we finish in 6 weeks or not. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. Someone says, don't rush the magic dance. So maybe let's just see how far we get. And now there's 20 minutes left. There's some good questions I'd like to go over. There's some questions that have been written in here. So maybe just let's just do that. Yeah. Anyway, let's at this point do questions. So I still have a question about Chapter 1, generally visible phenomena elements as described as measureless. Why is it measureless? The moment that we try to measure, as we do in objectivist science, in materialist science, objectivism, we try to objectify, measure, quantify. That's where we fail to connect with reality. If we think that phenomena just exist in terms of the gross outer elements, we fail. And actually, you can go just if you're a physicist, you can go in and you'll acknowledge that as you break down phenomena, you don't actually find anything, except finally you just find something that we, as place markers, refer to in terms of subatomic particles, quarks, etc. But that's place markers, and even physicists would acknowledge that. So at the end of the day, there's nothing that we really we can measure, and that's relative truth. That's actual actual relative truth for sure. You know, this object here weighs, whatever, but at the same time, we fail to understand the nature of reality if we just think in terms of these limitations, these labels. So that's why we talk about measurelessness. What is display? Wisdom display, emptiness display. So what is meant by this? This is the natural capacity of the mind. So the mind is not just blank, even though the mind is entirely intangible. We can all agree on that. We cannot touch the mind. We cannot in any way quantify, measure, objectify the mind. We all agree on that. It's intangible. And yet, this mind gives rise to everything. The perception right now, you're hearing me speak, you're seeing your screen, there's smells in the room, there's the world outside. Everything takes place, and yet there is not a single time actually where we could say this is experience outside of the mind. We're not falling into what we call solipsism here. We're not saying that there is only, we're talking about personal and general phenomena. So there's shared perception. So we're not going into any kind of like weird thing that there's nobody there except me. But we are saying that whatever we're experiencing right now takes place within this mind. And that we call display. And it's on the basis of understanding how display is not other, that Samantabhadra was free, and it's on the basis of us objectifying display as other that we have this alienated condition of a sentient being. So it's a key term really. Display is a little bit something that we use in Vajrayana, but it essentially covers over this condition of duality. Is inverted relative truth the same as someone else's personal phenomena? No, they could very well be valid. Like we both agree that, we both agree that, gosh, what can we agree on? We can agree on that the Eiffel Tower is in Paris. We can agree on the round tower is in Copenhagen, and so on. So that's sort of a shared. That's a shared. That's shared. Sorry, that's shared phenomena. But someone else saying, I dreamt about I dreamt about the ocean last night. That's a personal phenomena, but it's not necessarily inverted relative truth. It's still actual relative truth for that person, and us, in that it's just personal phenomena. We can't really refer to that as inverted necessarily. In the process from impure perception to pure perception, how the changes occur in relation to the five senses and consciousness. Thank you. That's a big that's a big question. But the bottom line is, this is essentially the process of vipassana. It's the process of seeing clearer. So that occurs in terms of us being less attached to the five senses, less prone to attachment and aversion. So essentially, it's the diminishing of the duality of self and object. But it's important that we understand that as we approach pure perception, it means that we're beginning to see things more accurately. So that's regardless of how we are seeing it in terms of what we call the dhatus, the senses and their objects, or in terms of the experience of self and the skandhas and so on. All of that is the place in which there's less confusion and there's greater clarity. Union of cause and result, could that be seen as the union of wisdom and skillful means? Yes. Yes, I think we could say so. Yeah. Usually when we talk about, the non-duality of the cause and the result as innate to the result, as the result as innate to the cause. Yeah, I would tentatively, it's something I'll have to think about, but I'm sort of, that's, I think for the time being, I'll say yes on that one. Is it normal that I don't see Jakob? I'm not sure if you're referring to your video camera not working or if it's something more than that. But of course, this is always sort of the epistemological question: are we really touching the object in our perception, right? So that's something actually in the Sutrantika teachings we talk about, that we actually are not seeing the object, but we're seeing our version of the object. So yes, that is normal. Put it that way. Let us take 12 weeks or more. Good. Okay, great. Let's just dance. Cool. Okay. Please take lots of time. Okay. What is mind? Is mind emptiness as well? Yes. If we perceive everything through mind, then is it we? Emptiness is perceiving emptiness through mind? Yes. So emptiness is perceiving emptiness? Yes. What's the point of this happening? Well, actually, this is the nature of delusion. We fail to essentially settle into the openness in which there is not the positing of self and other, and there's no notion particularly of any object as other. So this is, you could say, the vast expanse, put it that way. Now what happens then is we fail to appreciate that, and failing to appreciate that, then there is me and the experience of the space that I'm in. And that's where the mind is this intangible quality that has gone wrong. So that's where there's what was originally this non-dual, unbounded, measureless quality, it retracts into a confused self-consciousness. And that we then refer to as mind. So it's then at the places, it's at that juncture of confusion that we then need to come back. So we can't just wish it away, we have to deal with it. And that's why in the Buddhist teaching, we emphasize mind. It's not just, we're not ignoring everything that is then also the display of this mind, including our body, including our speech, including our perception of a phenomenal world and all of that. We're not ignoring that, but the headquarters is this mind. And that's why it's essential for us to begin to get back to our, you could say, original condition. We need to first see this way in which we confused hold on to a self, the confusion that projects phenomena and other. That needs to be dismantled. And that we do on the basis of seeing how the mind is mistaken. So that's where we begin the path with understanding where the cause of suffering comes from, which is then the confused mind. So that's where we work with this confused mind and we try to understand this confused mind. And in that we cannot grasp anything about this mind, we refer to it as empty. And also when we look at the way that the mind projects onto the phenomenal world and sees it as solid, the Buddha comes in and says, sorry, you see it as solid. But just like when you're caught by a movie, then you're sort of freaked out because you're watching a movie. But just like you fail to actually understand it's just a movie, that's similarly also the way that you're solidifying phenomena, then there is nothing intrinsically solidly there. So that's where we establish this, we become clear on where it is we go wrong. And we then relinquish the cause of this, which is then the confused insecurity that holds on to self and makes self a big deal. So through the path, we have the antidotes for that. The remedy for this is the practice of the path, the understanding of the nature of reality and the application and integration of this understanding through meditation and also what we call post-meditation. So the mind is mistaking its obstruction adjunction to self-secret essence when conscious. Yes, that is where you could say, again, somebody asked, what do you mean with self-secret? And that is in fact where we fail to understand. And it's not as if somebody's holding out on us. It's just that our inability to see it, it's a secret to us. Okay, I'm just gonna, before I do more questions from the, I'm just going to, what is it? This is where the surrendering comes in. Well, surrender, yes, it can mean a lot of things, but of course, when we talk about the mistaken nature of the mind and the delusion that constructs self and other, then there has to be a willingness to see, I've gone wrong. So there has to be a softness. That's where we're not rigidly holding on, this is me and this is etc. the other, but rather there's a softness, and that's where surrendering initially, from the very start really in the Buddhist path, we need to engage this quality of humility that surrenders. And this also paves the way in order for us to gauge the qualities of enlightenment as it manifests externally in the form of a teacher. So also there, in terms of the teacher, there is this quality of connecting with the teacher through surrendering or through bhakti, through devotion. So, so somebody said, yeah, self-secret. The 5 elements are interdependent and inherent within each element. Well, this is where Rinpoche was describing in chapter 1, how the way that we've failed to understand reality, and then gradually the intangible builds into solidity, and we end up with the 5 elements, like the sort of intangible quality of space is then increasingly solidified as air, is increasingly solidified as warmth, is increasingly solidified as moisture, is increasingly solidified as solid, and so on. And then, so basically space and air, fire, water, and earth. And then when we die, in terms of the elements also, then it's the opposite. Then earth dissolves into water, water dissolves into fire, fire dissolves into air, air dissolves into space. If we grasp at substance with attachment, it is because with our gross element deluded mind. So what we mean with that is that we essentially we fail to see the nature of the particular object, in this case then substance. So when we grasp at substance with attachment, we're identifying a desirable quality in that. We like this and we solidify it. Same happens when we dislike something. We're also failing to see phenomena for what it is. We're just relating to it in terms of our particular labeling. So again, we're not touching on reality. We're simply just freezing reality in a particular way. We fail to see the fluid nature of phenomena. So the obstructed gross elements, Rinpoche uses the word obstructed as solidified. So you could say everything exists within what we can tentatively refer to as sort of a flow of causes and conditions. And we're freezing that flow. We obstruct it. We're prevented. So that's also why we sometimes refer to through what holds us back from enlightenment is this condition of obscurations, or sometimes referred to as obstructions, jibba in Tibetan. It basically means it's veiled or it's obscured, obstructed. Love creates anger by controlling through grasping. Well, that I think there we can refer back to sort of familiar ground, the way that we in our culture construct narratives around love, right? Because that's where we very often are frustrated when the object doesn't behave the way we would like, right? So that's where we get angry. So there's a significant other who's just not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's where we then love turns into anger, right? And again, this shows the limited nature of self-centered love. And of course, that's where the wisdom in love lies in love not being self-centered, because there's nothing wrong with love in and of itself. But the problem is when it's filtered through the insecurity of ego, then the lovers become angry. Recognizing the subtle elements inherent in gross elements. Well, this is where we look beyond just the appearances. That's where Rinpoche last time he was talking about how upturned lip can reflect joy within, right? So somebody's smiling, and there's a whole dimension which is much more real than just the face. But the face is the external, you could say, manifestation of that. And likewise, also all the elements, they innately, beyond just their gross appearances, possess this dimension that is pure. And so we actually we as individuals, we very often are probably sensitive enough to see that there's a correlation between our mood and the way that the world is playing out outside of us. So that you can say there's not what materialist science would talk about, something called causal closure, meaning there's not any causal relationship between us and the phenomenal world, whereas we can actually see that there is this connection between us and the world outside. Okay. The enlightened mind dances, like to choose to eat or not. Well, that refers to the enlightened person can choose to engage. Like Tongsi Rinpoche says, it makes it easier for us to relate to our guru when the guru likes pizza, right? So that's where the guru, in terms of compassionately manifesting in that world, then appears to like pizza, or appears to like soccer, or appears to like boxing, etc. And that's where the enlightened mind can choose. The enlightened individual can also choose to not sort of display that kind of attachment to ordinary perceptions. Good practitioners can purify their gross internal and external element. How to practice to purify to get lighter and lighter? Well, this is what we do with the practice of Dharma. So us, through the practice, through being less attached to the way that we engage in toxic habitual patterns, enable us to have a much more open vision and a much more open relationship to our perceived world and the perceived external elements. So it's all the practice that we're doing on the path from the very moment that we begin to diminish negative actions, develop awareness and respect for the other in terms of non-violence, non-aggression, through the practice of meditation, all the various aspects, they all facilitate this. It's all softening the ordinary habitual mind. About the energy of secret root circumstances never diminishes. How to recognize and connect with our secret potential of our elements to make it manifest. Again, same thing. Through us practicing non-violence, peaceful behavior, meditation, we're connecting with a natural condition. We're aligning ourselves. We're not introducing anything new, but we're really just being true to, you could say, an innate intelligence, an innate wisdom. So that's where we are effectively, no matter what vehicle we are practicing in the Buddhist path or any practice that we're undertaking, it all essentially facilitates this connecting with this secret potential and making it manifest. Our phenomena are constantly in the process of becoming stale and inert. Unless through practice we can return them to freshness. What is the practice? Again, same thing. What is the secret essence that permeates all phenomena? Well, phenomena has never moved from its original ground, and that's why phenomena are uncontaminated. What has happened is that we misconstrue phenomena through our confusion, and that's why phenomena is a secret to us. But for us to connect with the secret of reality is really just to removing our blinders. And that again is what we're doing through the practice of the path. For the true practitioner who understands the pure elements, there is no more gross daytime habits and no more subtle daytime habits. Please clarify this paragraph and how to practice to attain this stage. This refers to connecting again with same thing. And again, this is where we're speaking about connecting to this insubstantial yet vivid quality of wisdom in which there is a continual ongoing experience of luminosity or presence, awareness, and so on. And for the yogi who's engaged in that, then there's no difference between daytime and nighttime phenomena. Please give examples of how to purify ego's habits in order to change negative phenomena into positive phenomena. Sure, that's kindness to when we get into a bus and it's crowded, to give our seat to other people. It's the practice of meditation in which when thoughts arise, we don't tag along blindly with this narrative or that storyline and so on, but remain clear and merging with the teacher, thinking of the teacher, recognizing how the teacher's quality lies beyond the ordinary confusion and mingling with the teacher. So these are examples of how on the practice of the path, we continually generate this, or we we effectively achieve transforming negative phenomena into positive phenomena. The phenomena, how does this relate to the rainbow body? You're asking me? I think what Rinpoche is intending to, when he refers to the rainbow body, is again to see when we connect properly, fully with phenomena, then they no longer exist in terms of. I was talking about the youthful vase body. So of course we talk about liberation into the youthful vase body, and that is going right down to the core of this original condition that is ever fresh, the Buddha nature. And that's where even the elements, then the inert elements, dissolve into to light, basically dissolve into their primordial ground, which is light. It would forward to relate these wonderful teachings with sadhana practice more and more, and even more and more with our day-to-day normal activities. Yes, I mean that's why we study these texts, is because they really inform the value of sadhana practice. So if we're new to Vajrayana, it begins to give some idea of the landscape, and if we are practicing Vajrayana, immersing ourselves into with the wisdom of someone like Thinley Norbu Rinpoche and sharing his perspectives, this so informs and inspires really the practice of sadhana. The purpose of practices of purification, visualization, meditation becomes more evident, obvious with this search of recognizing this pure secret wisdom. And you are just answering to exactly this. Yes, I mean that is why Rinpoche wrote this, and and this is also where, you know, it's almost impossible to study this without actually having already some relationship to these practices like purification and meditation in one form or another. In different traditions, the 5 Buddha families are explained different in terms of color, elements, and qualities. Why are the differences? Are these connected with different tantras? Basically, yes. Different ways at getting at it, but yes, there's different tantras that will explain these slightly different. You know, sometimes the central figure is according to the Padma family, sometimes the central figure is according to the Buddha family, and so on. I look forward to. Oh, okay. I look forward to. Yes. This is very much something that, you know, practitioners, they would take these works, something like this, and just, you know, keep by their pillow. You know, it really is something that continually speaks to our path. Yeah. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's expression in English language is so extraordinary and unique. It is good to take time. Helps to allow it to unfold. Yes, so true. And of course, this here, I mean, this is also where, please, by all means, don't regard what you get. If I'm here to sort of just treat this material from a different angle, and this could hopefully clarify, but I mean, you don't want to starve yourself of the incredible experience of reading Rinpoche. It's like one long poem, you know. You can't talk about a poem unless you've actually read the poem. So, and there's so much power in the written word from somebody who has this experience, and us who read it with an open mind. This really soaks, it really permeates our DNA and reaches, because secret wisdom element touches that. So there's a lot of this quality of blessing that comes about on the basis of Rinpoche's actual words and his extraordinary use of English. Yeah. I have found Thinley Norbu Rinpoche difficult to read and comprehend. This has been helpful. Thank you. Relating this to sadhana more meaningful too. Yes. Yes. And it's also the case that when we revisit a text like this, you know, again and again, all of a sudden so much more dawns, because we've also moved. We've also been, you know, enhancing our experiences through the practice of the path. Okay, so we'll leave it at that and just conclude with dedication. Okay. Oh, we hadn't actually gotten to the youth of Oz body. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad, everybody, that we don't have to, there's no constraint. So we'll just have to see how we go. Actually, we could use so much time on this, you know. But anyway. So please read the chapter on lineage, and then also read habit, dream. What? Who wrote this? So please read the habit. Please read the next chapter, which is habit, dream, and time. Yeah. What am I saying here? What you're saying? Okay, let's just say. Let's just be clear. So habit, dream, and time, play mind, and magic in the spirits, and also obviously lineage, right? Yeah. So please read that to next time. Excuse me. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Ever absorbed in the display of divine forms and primordial awareness, appearance, sound, and perception in the state of divinities, mantras, and dharmakaya, may I, inseparable from the practice of the profound and secret great yoga, attain within the essence of mind the state of one taste. So please, there's someone asking actually with regards to page 29, just ask it next time and we'll include it. We'll include it with the questions then. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next week.